If you're a K-pop fan and you're at all engaged in fandom spaces, you might have come across clips like this.
I got all I need, you know nothing else can be the way that I feel when I'm dancing with my girls.
Or maybe like this. Or something along the lines of this. Clips that circulate with captions along the lines of "the mics are on, this is what live vocals should sound like," or "other groups take notes." Fans praising their favorite idols for their outstanding vocals. But what if I were to tell you nothing of what you just heard featured any actual raw live vocal? I know, shocking. And before anyone feels the need to get defensive, this is not a drag. I'm not attacking anyone, I'm not here to call any idol talentless. This is me pointing out facts. Because in my years as a K-pop stan, I have noticed two things happening simultaneously. Number one, it has become increasingly common for K-pop performances, especially on music shows and broadcast stages, to rely on pre-recorded vocals, extremely loud backing tracks, or heavy post-production edits. And number two, as this has happened, it has become very clear that a lot of K-pop fans don't actually know how to tell apart what is live and what isn't. The word live in K-pop doesn't necessarily mean what most people would think anymore, and maybe it never did to begin with. But the term has been stretched, blurred, and repackaged in so many ways that it is no longer a technical description, it's more of a compliment. And in some cases, it can be used as a weapon. So in this video, I want to unpack what it actually means to call a K-pop performance live, what most fans think they're hearing, what they're actually hearing, and how those two things have ended up quite far apart. Because as live vocals have become rarer on broadcast stages, the idea of live didn't necessarily disappear so much as it changed. And if we're going to keep using live vocals as a measure of talent, legitimacy, and authenticity, then it is probably worth understanding what we're actually listening to in the first place. When the average K-pop fan talks about live vocals, the conversation is rarely built on technical knowledge. It is built on shortcuts and generally accepted assumptions, patterns that we've learned to recognize and come to trust over time. If a performance checks all the right boxes, then we will happily label it live and move right on along. The problem comes with the fact that many of these boxes no longer mean what we think they mean. So let me break down some common assumptions I've seen floating around and why they're more often than not completely wrong. Assumption number one, if you can hear the artist breathing, then it has to be live. Audible breathing has long been a sure sign for authenticity. A sharp inhale before a high note, some pops of air on the proper consonants, or heavy breathing during choreography gets treated as proof that the idol in question is really singing live in that moment. And to be fair, the logic behind it is solid. In older live performances, breathing was simply a byproduct of singing and dancing at the same time. It wasn't edited out, nor was it emphasized. It was simply just there. But in modern K-pop, the age of the pre-recording, breathing isn't always accidental. Many pre-recorded live tracks are designed to sound raw, to stand apart from the studio version, and that includes intentionally leaving small breaths on the track. So while breathing might feel like the most human, undeniable proof that something is live, it is also a simple thing to manufacture. Breathing has become something that can be recorded, edited, and strategically placed to where it no longer really functions as reliable evidence. Assumption number two, if it doesn't sound the same as the studio version, it must be live. It is common among K-pop fans to think that if something sounds different from the studio version, particularly if it sounds quote-unquote worse, then it is for sure a live track that we're hearing. And once again, there is logic behind it. The fact of the matter is that live singing is never going to be as polished as a produced and edited studio track. A little shakiness here and there, a slightly different tone, or a high note that doesn't land perfectly are all commonly read as authenticity. However, not all imperfections are unplanned. Pre-recordings are often recorded to sound live, so any natural imperfections are kept on purpose, sounding just imperfect enough to convince fans that this is indeed a live track, but not imperfect enough to criticize the idols for their vocal skills. It's a fine line, and a lot of companies are tap dancing on it on the daily. So just because something sounds worse than the studio version, or even just different from the studio version, that doesn't automatically mean that it's live. A lot of the time, it is all curated imperfections. Assumption number three, if it's labeled live, then it must be live. The most literal misunderstanding out there. If something has a label deeming it live, then it must be live. Music shows, official broadcasts, and vocal-focused content use the word constantly, and understandably so, fans tend to trust it. But in a lot of cases, the label live is a broadcast term, not a vocal one. When talking about music shows, award shows, festivals, special performances, etc., the term usually means that it was recorded in real time and possibly also broadcasted live, but it says nothing about whether what we're hearing is the raw live feed from the microphone. And naturally, a live broadcast is not quite the same thing as live singing. Even in shows built around vocals, like It's Live or Killing Voice, the audio that we hear is rarely completely raw. While the vocals are indeed recorded live, they're mixed, balanced, and cleaned up in post-production. Minor mistakes can be smoothed over, pitch can be corrected, volume can be evened out, so the idols appearing on such shows are indeed singing live, but the finished product that we hear is not the raw live version. It is a polished version of what happened, not the exact sound as it occurred. So while fans often take live as a label to be trusted, in K-pop, it often describes the format of a performance, not the purity of the vocals. And assumption number 4, if they're holding a handheld microphone, then it must be live. Handheld microphones have historically been seen as a kind of visual shorthand for vocal credibility. It looks more serious, more raw, more real, more difficult to fake. But just like with a headset mic, what we hear on broadcast isn't necessarily from the microphone itself. It is the final audio mix. A microphone, handheld or not, can be on and still barely contribute to what we're hearing. Or it can be on and it's the only thing we're hearing. Or in some cases, it can be completely turned off and all we hear is a pre-recorded track. So the presence of a handheld microphone in and of itself tells us nothing about how much of the vocal, if any, is actually live. Now, none of these assumptions exist because fans are ignorant or stupid. At least, that's not my impression. They exist because they are the rules that we were taught by the genre, and then over time, the system has changed. The problem isn't necessarily that fans use the wrong markers for live performances. It is more so that those very markers have stopped being as reliable as they once were. And I believe that is how we've ended up where we are today. A place where so many fans genuinely believe that they're hearing live vocals, when in reality, they often aren't. So if all of these common markers that we have relied on, breathing, instability, even the word live itself, are no longer reliable on their own, the question remains, how do you tell apart what is actually live and what is not? An important thing to take into consideration is how live vocals in K-pop is not one thing. It exists on a spectrum, and most performances will fall somewhere in the middle rather than at either extreme. So allow me to break it down into a few simple main categories and tell you exactly how you can try to differentiate them for yourselves. Starting with the most widespread form of live vocals you will hear in K-pop, live singing over a backing track. This is what you're going to hear on most music shows, concerts, festivals, year-end stages, pretty much everywhere, and it is this I want you to look out for if you're going to try to spot live vocals for yourself. With this type of live performance, a pre-recorded version of the song, not necessarily the studio version, is playing in the background and the idol is singing over top. The balance between these two different layers can vary wildly. Sometimes you can hear the vocals loud and clear, almost as if the artist is fighting with a backing track. And sometimes you have to turn the volume up to the max and listen intently to hear even a whisper of the idol's live vocals. The clearest giveaway to this type of live vocal is the presence of two tracks. The backing track is going to stay full, steady, and constant, and the live layer is going to fluctuate. The live voice will be affected by everything going on stage. It responds to movement, changes depending on distance from the microphone, it gets rougher during intense choreography, and it might stop altogether if the idol takes a breather or pulls away from the microphone. You will be able to hear small imperfections in the live layer, whether that is uneven volume, breaths, pops of air, bumps on the mic, or background noises from choreography. And in group performances, you will also often get noticeably different volumes for the members, depending on a horde of factors like technique, stamina, voice projection, and simply how much they're moving. All of these things coupled together are wonderful indicators that the idols you're watching are actually singing live. Moving on to one far end of the live performance spectrum, we have entirely live singing with no backing track. This is rare in K-pop as a whole, especially when talking about broadcast stages, but it does happen on occasion. Most often, you find fully live vocals in encore stages, but you might also stumble across them in certain festival performances or some year-end performances. The live vocal, directly from the microphone, stands alone, at most backed up by occasional harmonies alongside the instrumental, resulting in only one track. Besides the obvious difference of 1 versus 2 tracks, everything else that applies to live singing with a backing track also applies to this type of live singing, just more intense. Mistakes are more exposed, volume shifts more noticeable, breathing less controlled, and there is no safety net to these performances, so they may end up feeling a lot less polished than what fans are usually used to. Now, I would like to add a bit of a subcategory under here, just to complicate it as much as possible, of course, and that is entirely live vocals that have been edited in post-production. I guess it's going to come down to semantics and definitions of the word live, whether you want to consider this live or not, but personally, I don't feel right lumping this together with proper live in-the-moment vocals, so I'm making it its own category. It is in fact my video, so I do make the rules right now. In these cases, the vocals are indeed recorded live in the moment, but what we end up hearing has been polished. The possibilities of what can be done in post-production are nearly endless. Imperfections can be smoothed out, pitch may be corrected, volume can be balanced to even out the differences between members, and much, much more. This type of live vocal is common on shows like Killing Voice, It's Live, Imogen Service, Soundbomb 360, and First Take. The performances are live in process, but not raw in presentation. You may still be able to hear small imperfections here and there, but they are, for the most part, curated. I think the most telltale sign that something has been cleaned up in post-production is when you hear either reverb or that almost robotic auto-tuney twang that you get from heavy tuning. This is not always easy to spot, and it does take a bit of training to know what to look for, or listen for, I should say, and the level of cleanup on these performances can vary. But as a rule, all the shows that I listed earlier, and others in similar veins, they're always cleaned up, at least a little bit. And I guess you're gonna have to decide for yourself if you want to consider that live or not. On the opposite end of the spectrum, the other most common type of vocals you will see in K-pop is the pre-recorded vocals, which at their core is lip syncing. Instead of singing live in the moment, the idol in question lip syncs to a pre-recorded version of the track specifically made for the performance. I'd say this is quite different from lip syncing to the studio version. That could probably be a category in and of itself, but it is very rare to see in K-pop. So I'm going to lump it together with pre-recordings just to make it easier, because in principle, they're the same thing, just ever so slightly different flavors. A pre-recording can be done in different ways, either while the idols are performing the choreography, making it truer to an actual live performance, or it can be done more like a studio version, eliminating choreography altogether. How a pre-recording is done is going to affect how the pre-recording sounds, and in turn, how easy it is to point out. The main thing you should look out for when trying to spot a pre-recording: only one track. If you hear only one track on a regular music show broadcast, 9 out of 10 times it's pre-recorded. I don't make the rules, that's just the way it is. And maybe just as important as there just being one track is the fact that that one track will not respond to what is happening on stage. Mic bumps, claps, sudden changes in mic distance, if none of these things or similar things have any audible effect, it is pre-recorded. If the movement that the idol does has no impact on vocals whatsoever, it is pre-recorded. And in a group, if all members are at the exact same volume throughout the entire performance, say it with me, it's pre-recorded. Pre-recordings aren't necessarily easy to spot, especially since a lot of these companies go to great lengths to make them sound as convincing as possible. So it's entirely understandable that a lot of fans are convinced it's live. It is quite literally designed to be that way. Once you start listening for and looking out for these patterns, how many layers there are, whether the sound is affected by movement, how much variation exists on the track, you'll eventually stop needing labels to tell you what is live or not, and you'll be less dependent on visual cues. The performance itself will tell you what it is. It's just a matter of knowing what to listen for. Quick side note, if you want to actually practice telling apart pre-recordings and actual live performances, I recommend the channel I'ma Stan That. I'll link them in the description. They have a lot of videos on this exact topic, and they have heaps of examples included, so you can try for yourself if you so fancy. Maybe you're like me, and you're now asking yourself why. Why aren't live vocals prioritized anymore? And what changed between generations that led to such a marked shift favoring pre-recordings? I think one of the biggest and most noticeable shifts we find in choreography. Over time, K-pop performances have become more physically demanding, more visually precise, and with that, less suited for live vocals. Modern choreography often prioritizes sharp synchronization, fast transitions, and constant movement without regard for what any of these things might mean for a live performance of the song. Singing while dancing is hard. It requires its own set of technique and heaps of stamina, but it's not like every choreography is the same. Some types of movements are more obstructive to the airflow and in turn the sound that you're producing. And that is what we've been seeing more of since the start of the fourth generation. More of these movements that simply don't lend themselves well to preserve steady vocal projection. When we combine these borderline acrobatic movements that some idols are out here doing with fast-paced footwork, jumping, and overall just choreographies that do not give idols a single break from start to finish, it would be unreasonable to expect vocals to remain flawless and completely unimpacted. There seems to have been a subtle but steady shift towards evaluating performances visually first. How clean are their formations? How powerful are their moves? How synchronized are the members? And how engaging is the performance as a whole? And in this new visual environment, vocals become but a part of a much larger, more complex performance package, rather than the focus. You can add on to that the insanely hectic schedules of most K-pop artists. Between performances, variety, tour, traveling, practice, and whatever other projects they may have going on during comeback season, their schedules are packed full. And singing under these conditions can sometimes be extremely physically punishing. From a strictly practical standpoint, relying on both heavy backing tracks and pre-recorded vocals from time to time can be a tool to protect vocal health. So while I personally will always be a live vocal enthusiast, I too will admit that singing live isn't always a sustainable default option when you take all other factors into consideration. There is also the issue of risk. In the K-pop ecosystem as it exists today, a single bad clip can end up following an idol for years. Whether it's a voice crack, a missed note, or a single moment of instability, these things can all be clipped and weaponized as proof of incompetence. A well-balanced performance with quality vocals is often treated as the baseline expectations, while a single bad day can overshadow dozens of successful stages. From a company perspective, this skewed risk-reward balance just doesn't favor or justify fully live stages. Singing live has become high risk, and it no longer necessarily comes with a high reward. As a system, K-pop rewards consistency over spontaneity. Live vocals are at their core unpredictable. With no safety net to fall back on, every mistake and imperfection is on display, ripe for attack from netizens. So pre-recorded vocals provide a sense of control. Every performance can be subtly tweaked, and nothing unexpected in terms of audio is going to disrupt the visual narrative of the stage. In an industry built on the idea of perfection, where any minor imperfection will be scrutinized and picked apart, this kind of reliability becomes especially valuable. And just to play devil's advocate for a second, it does make sense. K-pop is not, and has honestly never been, just about singing. It's all about delivering a repeatable, high-quality performance across countless appearances. And in that context, prioritizing stability is but a strategic response to the way that performances are consumed and judged by fans. In the pursuit of perfection, or at least the illusion of perfection, live vocals have been deprioritized in spaces where the cost of imperfection is the highest. What changed between generations isn't necessarily the talent, but rather what the system itself chooses to prioritize and protect. At the end of the day, whether live vocals really matter all that much is going to depend on who you ask. For me personally, they do matter. I'm a singer myself. Vocals are the number one thing that I will listen for in any genre of music. And they're a big part of why I originally fell in love with K-pop as a genre. I tend to put a lot of weight on live singing, and I probably appreciate it more than someone who loves K-pop primarily for a different aspect, like choreography, or the visuals, or maybe the overall performance value. And I think that's an important thing to remember. K-pop has never been just about one singular element. So whether you personally care if an idol sings live or not is gonna come down to a matter of taste and personal preference. And based on that, I don't think it's productive to be ranking groups based on whether they sing live more often than their peers or not. Is a group inherently better than any other simply because they sing live on more stages? No, I don't think so. There are countless reasons why a group, or more accurately their company, may choose pre-recorded vocals over live vocals. Hectic schedules, intense choreography, vocally demanding songs, injuries, fatigue, or even just the type of stage that they're performing at all play a role. Expecting fully live vocals in every single situation isn't only unrealistic, it disregards the broader context of K-pop as an industry. Most of the time, it isn't really an issue of skill, it's a matter of logistics. So if at the end of the day, live vocals aren't really a reliable measure of talent, and they become less and less of a priority, why does the entire conversation regarding live vocals feel so charged? I think where it does start to matter is in the realm of fan expectation. As I opened the video saying, I've noticed a growing inability among K-pop fans, especially newer K-pop fans, to differentiate between pre-recorded vocals and actual live singing. When fans stan a group who rely heavily on pre-recordings, those flawless vocals get treated as the standard and in turn weaponized. Other groups get dragged for sounding shaky, unstable, or outright bad, regardless of how demanding the conditions that the live vocals exist within may be. And idols who frequently sing live are suddenly facing harsher backlash for perfectly normal imperfections. Breathiness, shakiness, any slight pitch issue, it all gets framed as failures rather than evidence of effort. And that is where my issue with the over-reliance on pre-recording lies. When fans are constantly exposed to vocals that sound perfect regardless of what is happening on stage, it warps the perception of what live singing realistically could and should sound like. Truly impressive live vocals start to go unrecognized as they simply cannot live up to the artificial standard that fans have internalized. Fans are busy praising what could have been astonishing vocals if they were indeed live, but 9 times out of 10, they're not. In a strange way, the system that, at least in part, is meant to protect idols from harsh criticism has ended up inviting more of it. When fans no longer have a clear, realistic idea of what live vocals can and will sound like, they become more suspicious, more critical, and more unforgiving. Live vocals aren't and probably shouldn't be the most important thing in K-pop, but understanding them, what they are, what they aren't, and what they once were, does indeed matter. Without this understanding, the conversation at hand becomes less about music and more about illusions that we may not even realize we're buying into.